Gospel Tangents is supported by users like you. Please support us at gospeltangents.com or on Patreon. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology, and first daily Mormon history podcast. I'm Rick Bennett. In our next conversation with Brittany Mangelson, she's the pastor for the Community of Christ congregation here in Salt Lake City, we're going to talk about the Standing High Council. That's actually a group that Brigham Young jettisoned in the LDS Church clear back in the 1840s. So the Community of Christ still has this Standing High Council. What is it for? And we'll find out more with Pastor Brittany Mangelson. So you don't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. Now, the other interesting thing that the LDS Church jettisoned, but you guys kept, is the High Council.
Standing High Council, yeah.
So we have a stake High Council. Do you guys have a Mission Center High Council?
No.
Okay. But you've got the High Council that is, I believe in the Doctrine and Covenants, it says the High Council is on the same level as the Quorum of 12. Mm-hmm. And so our church doesn't have this. Did you say it was a Standing High Council?
Yeah, that's what it would be called.
So our church no longer has the Standing High Council. What is the Standing High Council role in Community of Christ?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one because I've asked this question a million times, and I feel like it's taken me a long time to really figure it out because a lot of folks in Community of Christ are like, I don't know. Not everyone's like that, but they're not necessarily in front like the apostles are. They're a little bit more behind the scenes, but they do play a vital role in communicating with church leadership, particularly about policy, about culture, about how our theology is being lived out in their areas of the world. And so the first presidency, it's my understanding that they consult the Standing High Council if there's a policy change that needs to happen, or like infant baptism. I'm positive that the Standing High Council is in some of those conversations to consult the World Church Leadership Council on, their own cultural understanding, their own theological place. And yeah, so it works it's kind of like checks and balances a little bit. But they're not necessarily seen as like the front-facing ministers like the LDS, or not the LDS Church, like our apostles are, or in the LDS Church, right? Yeah. They're a little bit more behind the scenes, but they're kind of I would say maybe the gears that get things going, to really push for change, to represent diversity, and to, just kind of give consultation on policy and things like that. So, but again, that understanding has taken me years to come up with. And I don't know if it's just like not one of those things that's really talked about on like an every day or every week, like congregational level. And really a lot of this stuff isn't. I mean, a lot of Community of Christ people are like, yep, the people in independence, like they don't really get into like the nitty gritty of who does what. But
I'm in the nitty gritty.
and I'm here for it, right? This was one of those, it's fascinating. And I've been with Community of Christ for 10 years, and I feel like it's just this treasure trove of like scooping back, like where the differences and where the similarities are. And, again, like when I made that connection of like, oh, Community of Christ has communion on the first Sunday of the month, and we do, a free will offering that becomes oblation. This sounds a lot like fast offerings. And, so like, again, Portuguese and Spanish, not really, but there are connections. And those for me are kind of fun to, whenever I like discover something, I'm like, oh,
me too.
Oh, bless our hearts, like collectively.
So I think the most famous story about the Standing High Council is the milk stripping story.
Oh, yes.
And so do you know that story?
I mean, yeah, I don't know if I could. Yes, I'm familiar with it.
So I guess the interesting dynamics for me is you have Thomas B. Marsh, who is the president of the Quorum of 12, and his wife has this dispute about keeping the milk strippings, which the LDS, we don't tell that story correctly. But anyway, the point is, because Thomas Marsh, who's in the Quorum of 12, because there was this dispute over the milk strippings, the way they decided that dispute was they took the issue to the Standing High Council because they were of equal authority to the apostles. And so this was kind of I don't know, I hate to use the word court, but it was the way the dispute was decided. And so it's kind of funny because the LDS Church, Brigham Young got rid of that. We don't do that anymore. But Community of Christ has kept it. And I don't know that you guys have a lot of disputes among your Quorum of 12 so that they would have to have something decided.
Well,
but I guess they could. Oh, maybe.
I mean, so I'm not in the Quorum of the 12, obviously, the Council of 12 Apostles, but I mean, they represent a huge level of diversity. So 6 of them are men, 6 of them are women. It's my understanding, and I should have had this number exactly in my head, but I think most of them are outside of the United States. So they represent a huge level of diversity. So I've heard enough to know that they're not all on the same page, right? Which would make sense. If you are coming from completely different places in the world and you are trying to represent your field, your people, essentially, you're going to have disagreements. So I would not say that the Standing High Council serves as the same function as they did to sort out the milk strippings. But I also know that we are a denomination that was literally founded on dissent, and we were founded on checks and balances and not siloing power. And so I really do think that the Standing High Council, in conjunction with the Council of 12 and the First Presidency and the Presiding Bishopric and the entire World Church Leadership Council, probably have some pretty serious debates, right? and we're okay with that. We're okay with disagreeing, and we're okay with, we actually have a document called Faithful Disagreement that essentially acknowledges that we're going to disagree, but that our faith and our community and our relationships come first. And so we will take steps into the future together, even if there are deep disagreements. And it goes beyond just agree to disagree, but it really is seeing the humanity in one another within our disagreements and focusing on those shared values and the shared mission of the peace of Jesus, and then sorting out the details. And the sorting out of the details is where it gets kind of spicy sometimes, I think. I mean, you've been to World Conference, right?
I know.
Yeah.
And I will say this, going back to the baptism resolution, as well as a few other was, but there was some spirited, and it wasn't contentious, because I've heard they've changed things, especially, we haven't talked about 1984.
Yeah.
Because in 1984, that was when World Conference allowed women to hold priesthood. And that was really spirited. You talked about these Robert's Rules of Debate or something?
Yeah, Robert's Rules of Order.
Of the order. And so the thing that was so interesting was it felt a lot like Congress. President Veazey's up there. The chair recognizes Brittany Mangelson on podium number 10, and she's going to speak for 2 minutes about, whatever. And then, well, not only that, but and Brittany will be speaking in French.
Yeah.
Or Spanish or whatever. And the other funny thing was, President Veazey kept saying, "You need to slow down. Our translators can't keep up with you."
Yes.
And so everything was translated. But there were some, and it wasn't a bad spirit, but there were some definitely strong feelings on both sides of the scripture debate, the baptism debate, whether the community of Christ should decanonize. I think it was section 116, which dealt with race, because Joseph Smith had The third had used a word that we would not find politically correct today. Mm-hmm. The word was Negroes. And so there was a question about decanonizing that. And I remember John Hamer and Locke Mackay. Locke's an apostle, mm-hmm. and John's a 70. And they were like, we need to keep it. And other people are like, no, it's terrible. It's racist. And everybody got to hear. I mean, President Veazey's up there getting the whole thing. And, wow.
Yeah.
I love, and I understand, especially because I know 1984 with the revelation on priesthood and women was very contentious. And so they've done some things to tamp down on the contention, but still allow people to express their strong feelings without a lot of anger, which mm-hmm. which I find amazing and fascinating. It's where I have holy envy.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, because you guys talk about these resolutions before they ever get to World Conference, and then they still talk about them.
Yes. So, yeah. And I think that having such a long time to discuss these issues as a body is what really helps us kind of be adults once we get to conference at this point in history, right? So there's always a deadline that's usually a year in advance if you are going to put forth a resolution. And those come from an individual, they come from a congregation, they can come from a mission center, and they have to go through, various processes of approval before they hit the conference floor. So everybody is well aware of what we're going to be talking about once they get to independence to discuss the business of the church. And not only that, but during the day, we have different caucus meetings. So there's a mass meeting of all the elders. There's the Aaronic priesthood meets together. 70s will meet with their quorums. The
I wish I had attended those. I joked with, I don't know if you know Richard Brown, but he's from Missouri.
Yeah. Yep.
And I said, well, I'm a high priest. Can I attend the high priest meeting? And he goes, you sure, as long as you don't say anything. And I was like, oh, I should have attended those.
Well, actually, funny story, and not to talk about my husband, Josh, but he accidentally attended the high priest quorum for the first couple of days. And he was like, I don't feel like these guys are actually the priests that I'm supposed. And then he figured it out. He's like, oh no, I'm supposed to be with
the priest quorum.
Yeah. So it's kind of, he's like, I attended the wrong caucus meeting for several days, but nobody cared, right? It's pretty, we're pretty chill. Yeah. We don't check your card at the door.
Right.
You don't belong here.
Well, and they had a evangelist meeting too,
mm-hmm. Yep.
Which I thought was interesting because we don't think of them as a quorum, but why not? I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And so all of these topics and resolutions are discussed within the caucus. And then there's also a member caucus, right? So if you're a member of Community of Christ but not ordained, which is, again, a sizable amount of people, they meet together as well. So every single priesthood call that comes forth is talked about and debated. And I mean, I've heard open dissent of a lot of priesthood calls that, I'm like, oh, I really love this person, but somebody speaks very publicly against it. And we honor that, right? Any resolution that comes forward, people have the ability to speak for or against. And we like to do, the alternate. So someone will speak for it, someone will speak against it. So there's really that rounded conversation that happens. So by the time we get to the general business meeting with, the whole body, a lot of people have already felt like they've said their piece, right? They've spoken for or against whatever it is. And so I think that kind of gives a little bit of a buffer. So there's, there's ongoing conversation that's been happening for probably a year or more. And then also additional conversation that happens at conference. So that's not to say that the chamber of the auditorium doesn't get spicy, because it does. But I do think that having multiple avenues for people to share kind of helps it a little bit. And sometimes, when things are expected to be contentious, we've been talking about nonviolence for years, and surveys will go out and the leadership will want to get, some sort of temperature read on where people are at. And it's not necessarily just like a strict for or against. Our process of common consent provides for a lot of gray area. So you can, in some circumstances say that you support something, from like a 1 to 5 scale, you can put your level of support on that scale. So it gives you a little bit more autonomy, and, personal integrity, I think, rather than just like a black and white for or against. So we really do try to come together with consensus in a very pastoral way. Sometimes, the meetings do get intense. And so we have to pause for what we call a moment of blessing. And we have a whole team of spiritual directors, evangelists that will come and lead us through a meditation or lead us through a song or lead us through a reading that kind of, again, brings us back to this understanding of like, we are all in this together. We are here in, with God's Spirit, in the spirit of unity in diversity. And we honor that. And like, let's take a deep breath and keep going. So it's fascinating. And it's really interesting too, being in the communications booth, because I kind of sit up, on like against the wall. Like I'm not in the chamber with the people.
You're kind of in a suite, sort of.
A little bit, yeah, like the Super Bowl suite. And it's kind of fascinating because you can see the body language of the community, right? And you can see, people turning their heads. And it's a very interesting point of view. I'm sure being up on the rostrum, well, actually, I know that like the lights are shining on them. So I know that they actually can't see the audience very well. So I actually do feel like I have the best seat in the house, right? Because I can see what's happening in the body language of everybody. And it's a fascinating thing to witness and watch a community go through and say, yes, we want to support this, or no, we don't. And then give their reasons why. And somehow we still come out as a community, which I think is really, really beautiful.
Yeah. And I understand there's been a lot of lessons learned since 1984 with this, because there were a lot of the more conservative members that were against women's ordination that were silenced, and a lot of them became the basis for these other restoration groups that basically broke off from Community of Christ. And so it's interesting to see how your church has gone through these growing pains. And I mean, I think you've come out really well, because there still is a lot of diversity of thought. And I mean, just go to World Conference, you can tell.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's fascinating. What have we missed? I love how we've compared our two churches.
Yeah, we've done a lot of comparing.
So let's talk about your role as pastor.
Yeah.
I know you said, well, first of all, so you were baptized roughly 10 years ago.
Yeah, 2015. Beginning of 2015.
Okay. And then when did you become ordained, and was it a priest or another position?
Yeah, so I had my call extended just a few months after I joined. I joined in January and my call came in April.
Oh, that's pretty quick.
Yeah, and then I was ordained several months later. And then I served as a priest for several years, 2+ years. And my call to elder came in 2018. So I've been an elder since 2018.
Okay. And so an elder who's not the pastor, what are their roles?
Yeah, so, I mean, similar. I was doing a fair amount of the duties that I have as a pastor as a volunteer before I became pastor. Elders are still seen as leaders. We preach, we preside over services, we teach classes. If there's, some sort of administrative sacrament that needs to happen. So administration would be, if somebody needs a blessing, right, in LDS terms, outside of the walls of the congregation, I was traveling and, visited primary children's a couple of times and would do that sacrament. But yeah, being, again, just like invitational, hospitable, teaching classes, sharing resources, I have kind of served as a cultural interpreter for as long as I've been around. So we've had lifelong Community of Christ folks be our pastors. And they all expressed that they leaned heavily on the leadership, the local, ex-Mormon leadership of the community to just understand what this is that they're walking into, right? So
what are the hardest things for a lifelong Community of Christ member to not understand about Utah Mormons?
There's so many. I would say that the concept of worthiness is probably one of the biggest. Just this idea that like a bishop, a leader of your church could deem you unworthy. They're like, what does that even mean? Like it's not even in their vernacular at all. That's been interesting. The idea of following the prophet. I mean, I've had people like laugh to my face when I explain what it is. They're like, what? Like if Steve Easy told us to do something, we'd be like, Steve, check yourself. Like it's not like the whole concept of authority and worthiness and just like leadership, like the tie and pull to obey your leadership. That is not a concept in Community of Christ at all. And no matter how much I try to explain it to people, it just doesn't make sense. Because again, we're a denomination that was founded on dissent. And so the idea that there's not a lot of room for dissent in a denomination that has the same roots, they're just like, what is happening over there? They don't get it. And it's a really hard cultural thing to explain to people. I do know that some of our pastors have actually listened to general conference talks and, listen to presidents of the LDS Church to just try to understand what the messaging is. And, if there's a particular talk about obedience, I would share those with our leaders because I'm like, okay, this is the kind of stuff that, Mormons have to work through and why they come and want to know, what does your church believe about X, Y, and Z? That's another huge one. Folks will say, well, what does your church teach about fill in the blank? And Community of Christ is like, be a good person. Don't be a jerk. Follow the way of Jesus. Like there's not necessarily a black and white answer to every question that a Mormon would have. And that's also, they're like, what do they mean? Like, why would they ask that question? I'm like, well, in Mormonism, blah, 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 blah. And then, I go on for 3 or 4 minutes and they're like, huh? It's entertaining.
Well, very good. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Pastor Brittany Mangelson from the Community of Christ. In our next and final conversation, we're going to talk about her feelings about the new female prophet, Stacey Cram, and more. But you're only going to get this if you're our newsletter subscriber. So go to gospeltangents.com/newsletter, and I'll send you a secret link to the final part of our conversation where we're going to talk about Brittany's feelings about Stacey Cram.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And I know Stacey pretty well. She's been guest minister here in Utah and then at our larger Mission Center conference before. And I'm excited. I mean, I personally think that it, was past time. We're coming up on the 40th anniversary of women's ordination. And we've been ready for a while for a woman to be prophet president of Community of Christ.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt, so check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.